So Ran, you gave a very interesting talk about how to change regions' industrial structures, basically. Probably we shouldn't say industrial structure. How to initiate structural change, yeah, as compared to a more continued path in the same direction. So why you? Well, two questions. One is, why do you think it's very important to have structural change rather than continuing on the same path? And then tell us a little bit about what you found, what generates a region moving towards and adjusting to structural change.
Right. Well, maybe I think it could be explained well by distinguishing between three different types of growth paths. One is, okay, you can concentrate on what you're already good at. And you keep on doing that for the whole future, and that means, of course, that you completely rely on incremental change, and of course that can bring benefits to a region for a considerable period of time. But at some time, the region will get locked in, especially when it is specialized in just one or two industries. I mean, Detroit is of course the prime example, relying too much on the car industry and not diversifying at all into any other economic activities. So of course Detroit has prospered for many decades, if not a century. So it has exploited that.
What about Silicon Valley?
Well, Silicon Valley of course is
a recent example of,
yeah, but it's extremely diverse, and it tends to diversify into new growth paths. So that's quite remarkable about Silicon Valley. So I don't see so much happening what happened in Detroit. But of course it might happen in 20 or 30 years from now. You don't know. But so there's one development path. You continue to do the same things, and there's only incremental change. But that will stop at some point of time. Then there are two types of change you can implement at the regional scale. That is through related diversification and unrelated diversification. Through related diversification, it means that you develop new industries that can still build on existing activities at the regional scale, because you can still exploit the local resources that are around. Which of course is the most promising one, because in fact those new industries do not start from scratch, but they can really rely on and build on existing resources. And this is an event that you actually see happening a lot, and in fact has also a higher chance to be successful, because they do not start from scratch. But then there is always the question is, to what extent can you keep on relying on related diversification? Because if you don't change your capability base that is underneath it, it might still mean that you become locked in at some point of time. So for example, it might be the case that you're completely concentrated on an engineering-based economy, and it still means that you can that many new industries can grow out of that. For example, the example I gave during my presentation. So you have a region which is specialized in car making, motorcycle making, and aircraft industries. And well, you can still diversify into tractors or other types of engineering-based industries, but they still rely on that same capability base. And it might be the case that at some point of time you might also need to connect to other capability bases, like Dominique Fauré said in the discussion. Well, the food industry might also have to look outside its own competences and connect to industries that it had not connected with before. And in fact, that can induce structural change. And that means, that is my third type, is unrelated diversification, because it brings together activities that were previously unrelated and they become related over time, because they can mean something to each other, and it is about making new recombinations between previously unrelated activities, and they become related over time in that respect.
So it's quite important to understand when a change should take place, isn't it? And what is happening in a region is always a combination of the spontaneous decision of firms to locate, new firms coming in, firms changing their product spectrums, and of course what you describe as capability space, which is partly inside a firm, but also partly provided by the framework which policy provides or institutions provide.
Absolutely.
So if you want to widen this capability space, how do you see this interconnection between the policy context and the firm decisions?
Yeah, I mean, so what you actually see, and that is also what was at least part of my paper, is that that firms tend to become more coherent over time, right? So in fact, what you actually observe at the regional scales is that industries and firms really do mean a lot to each other. And that tends to increase over time, especially when there is a lack of new plant creation. And this is what I was showing in my data. So if you just continue incumbents, they tend to reinforce and make the capability base at the regional scale more specialized. So if that goes on and on and on, you might end up in a very strong and coherent regional capability base that is not anymore capable of diversifying into new directions. And so, but the way I have defined capability base is more about the industries and the firms that make that capability base, and policy is not really, let's say, part of that. At least I have not measured that. So I'm always a bit reluctant to say, okay, what are the policy implications? Well, the policy has not been part of my analysis. So I can see those tendencies, and I can see that firms tend to connect to related activities at the regional scales, and that might also benefit from that. But I'm not sure to what extent the state or the public sector was actually part of that. But of course it is a very interesting and important question, because it also relates to, can we intervene and can we make regions diversify into new directions when they are about to enter a locked-in situation?
Because in a sense there is two types of conservatisms. One is the sunk cost element, which means of course that incumbents would like to continue because they've sunk costs in certain fixed capacity, certain trainings of the staff, certain managerial practices, and therefore they have advantages compared to anything, any new entrants. Yeah? So this conservatism is one element, which means that the trajectory doesn't go towards structural change, but more incremental. And the other conservatism might be the policymaker, because there are also some cost elements there, but also there is the additional element that they like to have good relations to their constituencies. Could be firm, lobbies, could be electorates, etc. So how do you overcome these two forms of conservatism?
That's a very good question, right? So what you actually in fact observe is that policymakers become, let's say, part of the local economy and that they serve more vested interests. Well, let's say the policy implications I have so far drawn from this type of analysis is that you really have to renew and make vested players not part of that policy. So you really have to think carefully about how policy should intervene and where they should intervene. And to me that is not making strong sectors more strong, but it is about really going for new economic activities, while making still using the local resources. So I would say, if I would draw policy conclusions, I would say policy should encourage related diversification, because it means they move into new directions. Well, they can still build on existing strengths, but the strengths that are already available are not used to make stronger players even stronger, but it is used to make them move into new directions. And this is what I collaborate with policymakers on that, and that is quite a challenge, right? Because in fact, well, as I said, next week I will go to Norway, and there they have strategic development plans, and there you actually see what is quite on vogue is that you make local players part of these strategic development programs, because policymakers should not tell what economic actors should do, so you have to make them involved. So you have to you make local stakeholders part of this policy design. But of course, what is at risk here is that they gonna dominate policy design, and that actually they do not make the economy move into new directions.
In fact, isn't there also a bit of a contradiction between the direction in which policy very often goes, where one thinks there's a benefit of decentralization, meaning one wants to give more scope, for example, in structural funds. It should really be done at a local level, regional level, national level, but not at a... While, on the other hand, you need some injection of the new and to overcome these two forms of lock-in effects.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think it has to be a sort of multi-level.
Yeah, what I now discussed that with them is, I mean, I can, let's say, do the calculations I did, so I can, if I go to a region, I know exactly how the industrial structure looked like, and I can analyze it for the last 20 years, how it has evolved, and I know exactly which industries are related to each other and which one are not, and then I could really say, okay, there's quite a lot of potential right here, because you have two industries that we know that they have something in common, that they are related, but somehow they do not connect for whatever reasons. There might be system failures, there might be bottlenecks, why that does not really happen, and their policy could intervene and could mean a lot, because if they would connect, they could really mean something to each other. They are very complementary to each other, and that might lead to new recombinations. So again, it is not making those two sectors stronger, but it's making them connect, and through that recombination, new economic activities will grow out. And that, I think, is a very wise strategy in which you avoid that Western players take over the policy design. And policymakers should be really keen on prioritizing those initiatives that do not account for vested interests, because that only would lead to rent-seeking behavior. Of course, for everybody involved in at the regional scale, it would be the easiest solution, and that, of course, that is why you see that happening a lot in practice. But this is what you have to fight in a way, and such a policy design might help in that respect. But it is very difficult to implement.
Let me ask you a final question. Sweden, just like Austria, is a relatively small economy, a very open economy. So the exporting activity, the position of firms in the global specialization process and so on is very important. Now, I guess the regional picture of activity in Sweden is also strongly affected by some of the big players of Swedish companies in the global scene. And what you observe sometimes is undue specialization in certain regions, and probably an entrenchment of certain activities might reflect that they need a very, to overcome certain scale effects, when they put certain plants in certain regions. So there is again a type of conflict between making sure that the company as a whole is a bigger, significant actor, and what happens at the regional level in terms of a lock-in in a high degree of specialization.
Yeah, no, of course, but I think even I know now the example of Philips in the Netherlands, right, which used to be a coloss, a big company that was inward-looking, and therefore it did not perform for many years. But now it has transformed itself into a kind of open system in which they collaborate a lot with outside players. They make them involved in the innovation process, and Philips is really benefiting from that, right? So indeed, those anchors, those big anchors in the regions are crucial. But of course, they have to make sure that they act as a kind of gatekeeper in the region, right? So because they're extremely well connected to the outside world, so they can bring in the knowledge that come from elsewhere, but they have to more or less translate it and transcode it in a way that local players can actually benefit from that. And if that works really well, then you can see that the whole local economy can benefit that, from that enormously. And this is actually what you're seeing in the Eindhoven region, in the Netherlands.
Where Philips is located.
Yeah, but it is where Philips is located. 10, 20 years ago we said, well, Eindhoven region is Philips.
But now.
And now it is, Philips is still there, but there are many other players around. Many spin-offs have emerged from Philips, and that is because it has followed a different strategy, which is more in line in involving local players and make them smarter, because they could also mean something for Philips in that respect, and therefore it has wider implications for regional growth.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay.
It was very interesting.